The information in this video is brought to you by the Cognitive Enhancement Team at DFW, Lindsay Blaine, Drew Morgan, and Ed Pineda. Before we get started, we will do a quick memory activity. Here's a list of 10 words I want you to remember until the end of the video, but do not write them down. This may seem like a difficult task, but let's do something different. Instead of memorizing these 10 individual words, I will tell you a story about these 10 words. Feel free to close your eyes and create the story in your mind, or just follow along with the provided visuals. Alright, let's go. As you walk into the airport, you see the entry doors were recently egged. Now Clippy from Microsoft Office appears and asks if you want help, but you ignore him and walk inside. As you walk inside, there is a hole in the ceiling and it is leaking milk, filling up a pool-sized bucket. Now you run into one of your coworkers, Ant-Man, who drank some of that milk, but unfortunately the milk was poisoned, and now he's just lying down because he's not feeling well. So you continue to walk to one of the checkpoints and you see Al Bundy proclaiming loudly he does not want to part with his golden shoes and headphones. Now you walk down the terminal towards your checkpoint and see two passengers, one in Barney the Purple Dinosaur costume and the other in a Captain Corn costume. They are playing a friendly game of poker, wagering Captain Corn's laptop. In order to do anything with the information in the world around us, it must first enter our brain through one of our senses. Our brain collects millions of bits of information, and it is difficult to turn off all of your senses voluntarily, so they are always on and always collecting. This is what happens during the sensory part of the memory cycle. Then we must choose our filter. Our brain cannot possibly process all that information. We must give our brain a target. Out of the millions of bits of information thrown at our senses, we filter out about 99.999% of that information. The remaining 0.001% is our attention. Working memory is a temporary holding area. Whatever filter or focal point you selected will dictate the information going to your working memory. With this filtered information, you must choose to do something with it so that you can encode it into your long-term memory. If you did nothing active with this information, you will forget it. Think about a time you were at a social function or just new to the job or area. You were walking around meeting new people, you had your filter set on listening for people's names. Then, you met someone named Drew. You talked to him for a little bit and then walked away. And then you realized something. You forgot his name. That is because you did not do anything active with the filtered information. It just went into your working memory, but it could only last there for so long. It would have been best to do something with that information, which was his name, within a few seconds of hearing it. Maybe it was at a dinner party and you saw him eating a plate of strawberries. Your brain immediately thinks of a Hollywood star to tie it all together. So Drew was eating lots of strawberries, so now you see him as Drew Barrymore. And now, you will remember his name. Working memory works both ways as well. Not only does it process incoming information, it also helps actively work on previously learned information from the long-term memory to assist in problem solving and general recall of information. The more you work on chunking the information or rehearsing it, the better the encoding into your long-term memory. Just because you think you rehearsed it once does not mean that that long-term memory will be accurate. It takes effort in the transition from working to long-term memory to ensure the accuracy of that memory. So let's have a little fun. Search for bad fan art on the internet. That is similar to someone thinking they tried hard enough to encode that information, but it is not nearly as detailed enough as it should be, or those details could just be flat out incorrect. What happens when you try to recall that information later? Well, it's not as beautiful as you might think it could be. So your stored information is not as clear as you remembered it, and it'll affect your memory overall. So that is a basic rundown of how the world around us becomes a part of our memory. But what about the other things that happen in life that can affect our memory? Stress is a much talked about subject in various venues, and memory is not immune to it. Stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. Our body was built to handle stress and it reacts to stress appropriately so we can conquer the situation. Acute stress comes from those events that happen very quickly. It could be a predatory animal crossing your path, It could be a threatening escalation at the checkpoint. Regardless, these immediate events cause a chain reaction in our body. From the cascade of neurochemicals to the increased heart rate and sweating to the jitters in our hands. As far as memory is concerned, we will focus on these neurochemicals only. So cortisol is one of those stress hormones we hear so much about. And those acute stressors, cortisol actually helps improve our memory of the situation. It creates a tag in our brain about that event to tell us it is important and that we should remember it for future safety and recall. So that is the good. Like with anything else, too much of anything is a bad thing. Cortisol works great for those acute situations in memory, but not so much for prolonged stress. Part of the feedback loop with stress involves the hippocampus. This part of the brain is pivotal to learning and memory. It also has receptors to measure the cortisol released. So this overload of nonstop cortisol takes its toll on the hippocampus and can cause it to atrophy or shrink, just like a muscle would. So with a smaller hippocampus, it now has a hindered ability to assist with memory formation. One of the top reasons for memory problems in adults revolve around prolonged stress in their life and a lack of sleep. Usually, these two go hand in hand. Our brain and body were not intended to deal well with prolonged stress. Just like your car's engine and tires and everything else will wear down quicker if you never take your foot off the gas, our brain and body will wear down with nonstop stress too. If you notice you've had a lot less sleep lately, or you just feel like you're under a lot of stress, think about some of the cognitive skills you learned in class. Feel free to reach out to one of your coaches as well for additional assistance. Did all that stress and lack of sleep permanently diminish your brain's ability to memorize things? No. The brain is a living tissue, and it is so amazing in the fact that it can repair and restructure itself. One tip for improving memory is increasing your sleep from 6 to 8 hours a night. Sleeping allows your brain to flush itself with cerebral spinal fluid. If you ever feel mentally foggy, this could be why. Sleep also allows your brain to organize the information you learned during the day, and it will even activate the same parts of your brain you use during learning. It is like getting extra reps of information while you sleep. Physical exercise, specifically an aerobic workout, releases neurochemicals that can repair parts of the brain, including the hippocampus. So if your hippocampus shrank from prolonged stress and a lack of sleep, exercise can stimulate its regrowth. If you're trying to learn something new, exercise first and then go about your studies. Give yourself time at the end of the day to wind down so you can dedicate the appropriate amount of time for sleep as well. Just like the old adage, stress plus rest equals growth, learning is a form of stress on the brain, so be sure to give yourself rest, aka sleep, and not just a nap, to ensure a growth of your memory. Besides sleep and exercise, what else can we do to enhance our memory? Be active with encoding it. Many of us have used rote memorization where we study a list of words and definitions over and over again for the test. That can work to an extent, but the information is disconnected from everything else in our head, and we remember it merely as a single unrelated item. Rote memorization is a passive event. You are not processing the information, you are not chewing the fat on the information. You are passively reading it and moving on to the next page. On top of that, when we are passive, we are also more likely to be distracted and lose our attention. So how do we become more active? The testing effect. Testing yourself on the information without looking at notes, books, etc. causes you to recall the information from your memory. Study the information first, put your notes away, and then test yourself. The more you recall that information, the more you use that recall road in your brain, which in turn makes the memory recall more likely. It has been proven time and again that self-testing is far superior to reading notes over and over or any other passive mode. Testing makes the decay of information slower, and because you are active when studying it, your brain can now be more analytical when presented with a new problem not directly stated in the information you just studied. So how many of those words from the beginning do you remember? Take a moment right now to write down what you remember. Go ahead, pause the video to give yourself some time. Are you ready for it? Last chance to write down your answers. Alright, so did you get them all? The story we used was an example of a memory palace. We took items we wanted to remember, made them outlandish, and placed them in a location of a familiar place. If we go back to how memory works, we know we have to pay attention to things to remember it, and we also have to do something with that information that we focused on. By creating a memory palace, you not only paid attention to the information needed, but you also put effort into the encoding. Think bad fan art drawn quickly versus taking a little more time for the details. Then, making each item to remember outlandish helped. But so too did linking everything together via a story. Linking together these items is similar to chain links. Since you had all 10 items in one cohesive story, just going through the story allows you to pull on the links one at a time to retrieve the next part of that memory. There are a plethora of strategies and habits you can do to improve your memory and overall performance. Please reach out to one of your cognitive enhancement coaches for more information on the material we just discussed, or if you want further assistance in this area.